In a Ge'ez manuscript held at the Ethiopian Orthodox Monastery in Aksum, chapter 60 of the Book of Enoch names something living in the deep of the sea. Not a fallen angel, not a demon, but a creature the text says was created before the world had a name for it, and sealed into the ocean specifically because the land could not hold it. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible by the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. For 17 centuries, the Church called it forbidden. When 11 copies surfaced among the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, scholars found something they weren't expecting inside the oldest layers of the text: a description of the ocean floor as a sealed structure, holding something specific, something named, something the Church never had to explain because it simply erased the chapter that named it. If forbidden biblical cosmology is the kind of rabbit hole you don't climb back out of, hit subscribe now. Every week we go back into these manuscripts and read past what got smoothed over in translation. And if you already have a theory about what's down there, drop it in the comments before we get to the name. Chapter 17 of Enoch begins with a specific itinerary. Enoch is carried west, past every inhabited region, to the edge of what the text calls the Great Sea. The Ge'ez phrase is Bahar Abai, not a river, not a lake, an ocean. Verse 7 describes the floor of this place as dark stone, smooth and cold, unlike any stone found on land. Dr. Michael Knibb, whose 1978 Oxford translation of Enoch remains the standard scholarly edition, has noted that this section uses geographic language inconsistent with symbolic apocalyptic writing, compass directions, depth references, specific terrain, the vocabulary of a survey, not a vision. No ancient writer had any way of confirming what the ocean floor actually looks like. The deepest a diver of that era could reach was perhaps 100 feet. The real ocean floor sits over 2 miles down, and yet the description holds together as if someone had actually been there. Chapter 18 verse 9 describes something Enoch calls pillars of fire descending without end into the deep place. Fragment 4Q206, held at the Israel Museum's Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem, preserves related Aramaic material from this section, dated to roughly 100 BCE, older than every book of the New Testament. The phrase Enoch uses doesn't describe a single flash or a storm. It describes something continuous, ongoing, already in motion before he arrives, and still running when he leaves. Modern oceanography has a name for exactly this phenomenon: hydrothermal vents, some reaching temperatures above 750 degrees Fahrenheit, glowing orange against the darkness of the sea floor. The ancients called them pillars of fire. The description matches a phenomenon nobody on the surface of the earth could have observed for another 2,000 years. Chapter 18 verse 11, in the more direct Ge'ez renderings restored by Dr. Ephraim Isaac's 1983 Oxford translation, describes a structure beyond the pillars of fire. A great house built from stones of hail and ice, walls of fire surrounding it, and a door Enoch says he could not open. Ice beside fire, holding form. The text offers no explanation for how that's possible, and doesn't seem to think one is needed. It's the same flat, observational tone Enoch uses elsewhere to describe ordinary mountains and rivers. R.H. Charles's 1906 English translation, still the most widely referenced edition, softens this passage into more generalized, symbolic language. Isaac's translation restores the specifics, the materials, the temperature contrast, the sealed door, and notes in his introduction that Charles appears to have interpreted rather than translated at several points in exactly this section. Chapter 19 identifies the occupants. The angel Uriel tells Enoch this is where certain watchers who overstep their boundaries are held, their physical forms sealed inside the structure, while the text specifies that their influence remains active elsewhere, still capable of reaching the surface world even while their bodies are contained. Dr. Lawrence Stuckenbrook, of Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, whose work on the Book of Giants and the broader Aramaic Enoch tradition is considered the most detailed currently available, has noted that this passage describes a category distinct from the watchers imprisoned beneath the Judean desert, elsewhere in the same book. A different class of being, given a different sentence. Contained bodies, uncontained effect. The text never explains how both can be true at once. It simply states it, the way you'd note a fact rather than resolve a contradiction. Before we go further, If the kind of detail that makes you stop and reread a sentence twice is exactly what keeps you coming back to this channel, subscribe and like this video right now. It's the only way research like this reaches more people who actually want it. And tell me in the comments, sealed but still reaching us, coincidence in the wording, or something the text meant deliberately. Here's the detail almost every summary of this passage leaves out entirely. Chapter 60 of Enoch, in a section largely separate from the ocean prison narrative in chapters 17 through 19, names a specific being tied to the sea, Leviathan, described as a female monster dwelling in the abyss of the ocean, over a fountain of waters, paired with a male counterpart named Behemoth, given a wilderness on land. The text states plainly that both were separated at creation, one assigned to the sea, one to the land, because, in the direct rendering, the world could not sustain them in one place together. Not punishment, separation by necessity. Dr. George Nicholsberg's 2001 commentary for Fortress Press, still the field's definitive reference, calls this one of the least examined passages in the entire Enochic corpus, despite naming, directly, something the text says still exists, still occupies real space, still waits over a source of water at the bottom of the sea. Chapter 69 names a being called Caspiel, identified as the one who revealed the secret oath that seals the ocean prison shut. Verse 15 records the oath itself, called Becca in the Ge'ez, sworn, the text specifies, before the ocean existed, before the floor beneath it was laid down. According to the text's own internal sequence, the seal predates the thing it was built to seal. That is not how an emergency containment measure works. That is how something gets planned when the builder already knows, in advance, exactly what will need to be held and exactly where. The text never tells us how anyone could know that before the sea itself existed. It simply states the order of events and leaves the implication sitting there, unresolved, for the reader to notice or not. There's a detail in the Aksum Ge'ez tradition that rarely survives into popular retellings. The door to the sealed structure, the text notes, has no handle on the outside. It can only be opened from within. Enoch records this without comment. Uriel offers no explanation. A door built this way isn't designed to keep a visitor from entering. It's designed around the assumption that whatever is inside was never going to be the one deciding to leave, that the opening, if it ever happens, was never meant to be initiated from where Enoch is standing. The text moves on immediately afterward, as if the detail didn't need dwelling on, which, if anything, makes it harder to stop dwelling on. Chapter 17, verse 8, is typically rendered as the treasuries of the winds. Vague, easy to read past. The underlying Ge'ez, Adar Nafas, carries a secondary meaning scholars rarely bring into popular translation, the reservoir of breath. Not wind in the meteorological sense, the word elsewhere in Enoch is reserved for the breath of living things. The identical grammatical construction reappears in chapter 61, describing the preserved breath of the righteous dead, held until resurrection. Same word, same shape, two different contexts, one describing souls waiting to be restored, and one describing whatever is sealed beneath the ocean floor. That may be coincidence in the language, but once you see the two passages side by side, it's difficult to unsee. If a pattern like that is the reason you keep a tab open on a 2,000-year-old manuscript instead of closing it, subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments which detail unsettles you more. The oath sworn before the sea existed, or the door with no way to open it from outside. I read every one. When the Council of Laodicea removed Enoch from Scripture in 364 CE, the recorded objections centered on the Watcher's narrative broadly: fallen angels, forbidden teachings, unions with humanity. The ocean prison passage and the Leviathan naming in chapter 60 were never singled out, never individually addressed in any surviving conciliar record. They went out under the same broad ban as everything else, unexamined rather than disproven. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, dismissed Enoch's cosmological chapters as confused accounts unworthy of serious study, without engaging their specifics. Augustine, in The City of God around 415 CE, argued the ocean abyss material was borrowed from pagan sea mythology, an argument that addresses the passage's origin, not its content. Neither man explained why Enoch's ocean floor is described as dark, smooth stone. Neither explained the sealed door. Neither explained Leviathan. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, operating outside Rome's reach, kept every line of it in its canon, uninterrupted, for over 16 centuries. And when James Bruce carried 3 Ge'ez manuscripts back to Europe in 1773, Oxford scholars examining them called the ocean chapters irreconcilable with established cosmology. Not false, irreconcilable. Now, here's where it gets active. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were first catalogued in the early 1950s, the fragments touching on Enoch's cosmology and geography, including material connected to chapters 17 through 19, were assigned the lowest publication priority by the team coordinated through the École Biblique in Jerusalem. Fragments concerning law and calendar were released first. The geographic and cosmological material sat unpublished for over 30 years, finally appearing in Yosef Millich's 1976 edition. And even then, Millich's own commentary described the ocean floor passages as mythological elaboration without geographic content, a conclusion later specialists have quietly revisited without ever fully overturning. Whether that was caution, oversight, or something else, the record doesn't say. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying there's a literal creature waiting over a fountain of water at the bottom of the ocean, or a physical door built from ice and fire sitting somewhere on the sea floor with no handle on the outside. Enoch's account passed through centuries of transmission, translation, and interpretation before reaching any manuscript we can read today, and what a Second Temple writer believed he was recording may not map cleanly onto anything we'd call literal. But what the text describes, read carefully in the Aramaic fragments and the Ge'ez manuscripts rather than in a century of softened English translation, is not vague poetry, it's specific. A named creature, a sealed structure, an oath sworn before the sea existed, a door with no way out from the inside looking in. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe a Second Temple writer, working with the only vocabulary available to him, happened to land on a set of images that, 2,000 years later, sit uncomfortably close to a coastline no one had charted and a phenomenon no one could yet name. Or maybe the reason this particular passage was never individually refuted, only ever set aside along with everything else, is worth sitting with in its own right. The oath is still described as older than the sea it seals. Leviathan is still named as waiting over a fountain of water at the bottom of the ocean. And the door, in the oldest surviving language of the text, still has no handle on the outside. So I'll leave you with the question neither the councils nor the translators ever had to answer. If something really was sealed away before the ocean existed to hold it, what do you think would have to happen for that seal to finally break? Tell me what you believe in the comments. I read every one.